Well, I get to ask the first one.
All right.
And it relates to Iraq. I know you want to end the occupation in Iraq, and I do too. I have a 25-year-old son who says to me, "But Dad, we have to stay and fix it. We broke it." And I have my own answer to that question. But that's a morally serious question.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering how you answer it.
Well, a couple of things I would say. One, I would repeat what I said in my introduction, and that is we have, in my view, we have a moral obligation to help Iraq. And it's out of that moral obligation that we need to end the occupation, because it is absolutely impossible for this country to help Iraq. We're not helping Iraqis. We're spending $12 billion a month on an occupation, and we're ignoring the needs of 4 million displaced people inside and outside of Iraq. So as long as the occupation, again, continues, we're not going to help Iraq. Now, so that's the first thing. And then an analogy might be, if you had someone break into your home and pillage your home, would you ask them to stay around to fix it? And as long as those goals that I talked about remain the goals, and they do. And the recent evidence of this we have, by the way, is that the latest signing statement by President Bush. President Bush has signed more so-called signing statements than any other president, indicating that there are more than 1,000 U.S. laws that he doesn't have to abide by. Why? Because he's president. Because he's president during a time of war. That's very dangerous for a constitution. His most recent signing statement, at least that I'm aware of, says that he doesn't have to obey the will of Congress when they pass something that says we don't want to fund permanent military bases in Iraq, or we don't want to take control of Iraqi oil. That's his most recent signing statement. So my response to your son is that's the great impulse. We do need to help. But if we're going to help, we have to end the occupation. And the way we help, then, I believe, primarily, is to fund the efforts of the international community, the United Nations, Iraq's neighbors. It's not a direct role, it's an indirect financial role, because we have lost all credibility among most Iraqis.
That's kind of what I tell him, but not as eloquent.
I have a follow-up.
Yes, please.
It deals specifically with what I perceive to be a nearly inevitable result of withdrawing from Iraq. Now, myself, and I believe everybody here, agrees with you that we need to get out. But I also believe that it is inevitable, that I know of no way to avoid this, that they will fall into civil war, that our presence is delaying an inevitable civil war. I don't know of any plan. I've not heard of anybody come up with a plan that will avoid that. All right? Now, that civil war, that will have some serious effects, both on the life of the Iraqis, on the propensity to pull other regional governments into a Sunni Shiite war that could expand, and on the political effects in this country, because one thing you can be damn sure of, the party out of power, which will be the Republicans, will use that just like they did in Vietnam, as proof that it was democratic cowardice that lost Iraq. Just like even today, they complain that we lost Vietnam, not because we lost, but because the cowards pulled us out. How do you reply to this? How do you plan to deal with this? What will be your reaction to these?
First of all, that was one of the most articulate statements of the dilemma that I've heard. So thank you for that. Now, let me say that if we're honest, and I think you were being really honest, Iraq is dying. Iraq as a nation is dying. And the United States has crippled that country, probably forever. The analogy that I give is before the war, I debated Jim Ramstad, and I warned that all of this that unfolded was going to unfold. I said we were being whipped into a politics of fear, that this was about oil and bases, it would be a disaster, and it was. But the analogy that I gave was the Bush administration had an egg in its hand, and it said, they were saying, I want to take this egg and throw it against the wall. And those of us who were protesting were saying, no, don't do that. You throw that egg against the wall, it's going to be a big mess. No, we're going to throw this egg against the wall. No, don't do that. You threw the egg against the wall, right? That egg is splattered all, and Iraq is that egg. Iraq has been ripped to shreds So what I would say is I don't dispute that outcome that you've laid out may in fact happen. What I would say is the likelihood of it happening and happening at a more disastrous level, that likelihood increases with every day the occupation continues. So in other words, if the longer the United States stays, the more likely that's the outcome. So that's one thing I think. But we can't promise people that when the United States pulls out, it's all going to be fun and games. It's going to be fine. We can't say that. That's why ending the occupation is so important. But our role doesn't end there. Those of us who want to at least try to help Iraq repair, our obligation continues. And that's where I think we can direct some of those billions of dollars that we're now squandering on the occupation. Could be done in a way that would provide incentives for Iraqi factions within the country. As you demonstrate a capacity to move forward, you have, let's say $25 or $30 billion available to you to help the country reconstruct. Put it in an escrow account that it helps make that possible. The other positive thing is that most of Iraq, I would say all of Iraq's neighbors, actually on some level, although they want to expand their influence, they also don't want Iraq to have that fate that you just laid out. So that opens up at least a possibility for the international community in concert with Iraq's neighbors of trying to move in a direction that will mitigate some of that disaster. But you're absolutely right. It is a disaster. But what I would just add is every day we stay longer, the likelihood of the worst disaster becomes greater. So that's why it's important that we act now, not with fuzzy eyes. And in terms of how we deal with the political outcome, this is where I hold the Democrats responsible as well as the Republicans. It's Democrats who have too often given into a politics of fear. It's Democrats that didn't stand up to end this war. We should, I was paying attention. I knew that we were being lied to prior to the war. I'm sure that many of you did as well. But and now the Democrats are giving into a politics of fear again, at least in the Senate on FISA. We just saw it again this week. So I think part of the lesson here is that if you don't have courage and stand up for what's right, you are going to pay a political price. And it's a different political price than you're running away from, but there's still a political price. So I think we're going to have to just encourage leaders to be honest about this. And maybe last thing I'll say, and I'll try to do this really briefly, I fault both the U.S. media and the Democrats for not being honest about why the Bush administration invaded Iraq. We still have not had an honest conversation. I wrote a book about why the Bush administration invaded Iraq, and all I did was I just went back and I read what the neoconservatives who led us into the war were saying about the war prior to the war. And here's what they said in a nutshell. They said, Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. No one can stop the United States. We need to unleash our military power all over the world. If we do that, we can turn present military superiority into permanent global domination. And then they laid out what they called America's grand strategy. That was their term, not mine. And what was it? Well, regime change in Iraq, take control of the world's oil supplies, put permanent military bases in the Middle East, a new generation of usable nukes, militarized space, pull out of all international agreements that limit the unilateral use of U.S. power. This was their grand vision. And Iran was the next target. I mean, all this stuff. Well, if we don't have an honest conversation about why we're there, it's going to be tough to get out. So we need to, those of us who want to end the occupation, hopefully our voices can be magnified to talk about the real objectives of the invasion and the occupation.
Anybody else?
You did a good job on that.
Thank you.
The best job I've ever heard a politician make on that subject.
Thank you. So your good question and the response it deserves.